Commander Rylan Voss stood at the helm of the ship, the Resolute, staring into the abyss of space like it owed him money. The ship had seen better days, much like Voss himself, who had the kind of face that looked as if it had been used to mop a bar floor. "All right, you miserable bastards," he growled, his voice dripping with mock affection. "Time to save humanity." Again, his crew, a ragtag collection of the universe's finest rejects, sat around the control room looking as enthusiastic as a pack of wet cats. The asteroid ahead was their destination, a chunk of rock hollowed out to serve as humanity's makeshift Alamo. Inside, the United Nations had set up a battle arena, because why face extinction quietly when you can do it with style? This was Voss's least favorite kind of mission, the kind where survival was a distant second to not embarrassing the human race. "Commander," piped up Jax, the ship's pilot and self-professed ladies' man, though the ladies seemed to have a different opinion. "Sensors are picking up an incoming transmission from UN Command. Probably another plea for us not to screw this up. Patch it through," Voss said, rubbing his temples. He felt a headache brewing, possibly the result of too much recycled air and too many recycled problems. The screen flickered to life, revealing the face of Admiral Nyla Torres, a woman who looked like she ate stress for breakfast and washed it down with a shot of cynicism. "Voss, you're approaching the arena. Remember, we can't afford another snafu like last time. We suspect alien infiltration." "Stay sharp, alien infiltration, huh?" Voss replied, scratching at the stubble on his chin. "I thought those officials were looking a little too clean-cut. I'll keep an eye out for anyone who doesn't flinch when you mention taxes. Just stick to the mission," Voss. Torres snapped, her patience thinner than a politician's promise. "And try not to die. UN Command out." The screen went dark and Jax snorted. "Yeah, Voss, try not to die. Handy advice, that. Always thought death was more of an inconvenient interruption than a career ender," Voss replied, rolling his eyes. "Anyway, gear up. We've got a rock to storm, and I hear they left the welcome mat out just for us." The crew moved with the enthusiasm of a funeral procession, checking weapons, armor, and various gadgets that were supposed to give them an edge. The Resolute shook slightly as it docked with the asteroid, a reminder that even in space, nothing ever really worked like it was supposed to. Voss led the way, stepping onto the metal deck of the asteroid's entry point. The place was massive, yet somehow managed to feel claustrophobic. Corridors stretched out like a maze, and the air was thick with the kind of tension that made you want to punch something just to break it. "Feels like a party in here," remarked Tessa, the team's tech specialist, who had a talent for making computers do things they weren't supposed to. "A really depressing party. Welcome to our last stand," Voss said with a grim smile. "Let's hope the band plays something cheerful." As they moved deeper into the asteroid, they passed other teams, soldiers, mercenaries, even a few civilians who looked like they'd gotten lost on their way to something less suicidal. Everyone was on edge, whispering about the alien threat that had supposedly wormed its way into their ranks. Voss didn't buy it. Aliens were usually more direct about their intentions, like when they blew up cities or enslaved entire planets. Subtlety wasn't their strong suit. "Commander," Tessa said, stopping at a junction where two corridors met. Her face was lit by the glow of her handheld scanner, which beeped like it was auditioning for a horror movie. "I'm picking up something odd, a signal." "It's faint but definitely not human." "Alien?" Voss asked, his interest piqued. "Unless the vending machines are conspiring against us now," Tessa replied, her lips quirking in a half-smile. Voss nodded, his mind already running through scenarios, most of which ended badly. "Plot the source, we'll check it out." "Last thing we need is a surprise alien dance number." The team followed Tessa's lead, winding through the labyrinthine pathways of the asteroid. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife, and Voss could feel eyes watching them from shadowy corners, though whether they were human or otherwise was anyone's guess. They reached a door marked "Authorized Personnel Only," which could have meant anything from maintenance supplies to the private stash of someone with questionable tastes. Voss didn't bother to knock. He slammed the control panel with the butt of his rifle, and the door hissed open with a sound like a bored snake. "Nice technique," Jax commented, raising his eyebrows. "Ever consider anger management?" "Only when I'm out of things to break," Voss replied, stepping inside. The room was dim, filled with screens and equipment that hummed ominously. In the center, a figure hunched over a terminal, their back to the entrance. "Nice place you got here," Voss said, aiming his rifle casually at the figure. "Mind if we drop in unannounced?" The figure spun around, revealing a face that was unsettlingly smooth, like a mannequin that had learned to move. "Ah, Commander Rylan Voss," it said in a voice that was too smooth, too polished. "I was wondering when you'd show up." "Well, you know us humans," Voss said, his finger twitching on the trigger. "Always fashionably late." The figure smiled, or at least tried to. "You're here to stop the infiltration, I presume. But tell me, Commander, what makes you think you haven't already failed?" Voss felt a chill run down his spine, the kind of chill that usually preceded something deeply unpleasant. You talk too much for someone who's about to get shot. The figure raised its hands, not in surrender, but in a gesture of negotiation. Shooting me won't stop what's coming. The infiltration is just a prelude. Humanity's last stand has already begun, and you're standing on the wrong side of history. Nice speech, Voss replied, but I've got a thing for underdogs. Bad habit, I know. The figure's eyes flickered, revealing a hint of something not quite human. This is not a negotiation, Commander. It's a warning, noted, Voss said, pulling the trigger. The room filled with the sharp crack of gunfire, and the figure's head snapped back, its body crumpling to the floor. Tessa stepped forward, scanning the fallen figure. Synthetic, she said, her voice tinged with both relief and worry. But if it's here, then there's more. We're not alone in this rock. Well, that's just fantastic, Jax muttered. I was hoping for a quiet stroll through the cosmic death trap. Pack it up, folks, Voss ordered, glancing at his team. We've got a party to crash, and the guests of honor are overdue for a wake-up call. As they moved out, Voss couldn't shake the feeling that they were already too late. The infiltration was real, and the stakes had just skyrocketed. But if there was one thing humans were good at, it was defying the odds, often in the most spectacularly disastrous ways. Let's make sure they remember who they're dealing with, Voss said, more to himself than to the others, because if humanity was going to go out, it might as well do so with style. The asteroid loomed around them, its corridors now echoing with the sounds of battle preparation, clanking boots, murmured curses, the hum of charging weapons. Humanity's last stand might have been a desperate gamble, but it was their gamble. And if there was one thing Commander Rylan Voss knew, it was that humans were nothing if not unpredictable. Keep your eyes open, he called to his team as they marched toward the heart of the arena, ready to face whatever alien menace dared to challenge them. And remember, we're not here to win. We're here to make sure they'll wish they never came this way. The Resolute's corridors echoed with footsteps and the occasional muffled swear word as Commander Rylan Voss gathered his ragtag crew for what could generously be called a briefing. The ship felt like it was held together by duct tape and sheer force of will, much like its commander. All right, gather round, you beautiful disasters, Voss called out, his voice carrying the weight of someone who's had enough of everyone's crap but still has a job to do. We've got an interstellar tournament to prepare for, and no, it's not a new reality show. Jax swaggered into the room, exuding the self-assuredness of someone who'd just won a poker game against himself. I'm guessing the prize isn't a lifetime supply of vacation days, more like a lifetime supply of not being dead, Voss replied, scanning the room for the rest of his team. They were the kind of ensemble that made you question recruitment standards. Tessa was already there, tinkering with what looked like an old toaster, but was probably a plasma grenade. Her ability to turn mundane objects into weapons of mass destruction was both impressive and concerning. I assume interstellar tournament is code for we're all going to die hilariously. That's the spirit, Voss said with a grim chuckle. But before we embark on this suicide mission, let's meet the rest of our merry band of misfits. The door slid open, and in walked Cade, a sniper with a disposition as sunny as a black hole. He had the sort of presence that made people feel like they just walked onto a live minefield. Heard there's a chance to shoot things, he said, his voice dry as a desert. Only if you behave, Voss replied. And try not to shoot the wrong things this time. We're operating under the assumption that some of our fellow contestants are less than human, like Jax's ex-girlfriends, Tessa quipped, not looking up from her gadgetry. Jax rolled his eyes, clearly used to being the butt of the joke. Laugh it up, but when I save your asses, remember who's flying this tin can. Voss clapped his hands, drawing attention back to the task at hand. Focus, people, we need to be ready for anything. The UN little arena inside that asteroid is about to become the galaxy's least popular tourist attraction, and we're the headliners. Great, muttered Amir, the team's demolition expert, who'd just joined them. His face was a permanent scowl, likely from dealing with explosive devices and explosive personalities alike. I love a good explosion as much as the next guy, but does it have to involve me? Unfortunately, yes, Voss said, suppressing a grin. Now let's talk tactics. We're not just fighting each other, we're hunting for infiltrators. And if the UN intel is right, they're already here. So we're playing Spot the Alien, Tessa asked, raising an eyebrow. Exactly. But remember, shooting first and asking questions later only works if you're sure it's not human. Otherwise, it's considered rude. Rude? Cade snorted. Try explaining rude to a corpse. Let's avoid making corpses unless necessary, Voss admonished. We don't need any more diplomatic incidents. The last thing we need is a reputation for shooting first in an arena that's technically on our side. That's rich, coming from the man who shot an ambassador once, Amir pointed out. That was one time, Voss protested, though he knew it was a losing battle, and he got better. Now, if you're done reminding me of my greatest hits, let's get back to the matter at hand. The crew exchanged glances, the kind that spoke volumes about mutual distrust and shared survival instincts. Despite their differences, they all knew what was at stake. Humanity wasn't exactly the most beloved species in the galaxy, and this tournament was their chance to prove they weren't just a bunch of trigger-happy lunatics. At least that was the theory. All right, so what's the plan, fearless leader? Jax asked, leaning back casually as if they weren't on the brink of potential obliteration. We infiltrate the infiltrators, Voss replied, a wry smile on his lips. It's a game of sabotage and survival. We'll split into pairs, cover more ground, and keep an eye out for any behavior that screams not from around here. Define not from around here, Amir said, arms crossed. If they glow, float, or speak in tongues, it's probably safe to say they're not local, Voss said, counting on his fingers for emphasis. And if they do taxes without crying, Tessa chimed in. Also suspect, Voss agreed. And more importantly, we need to stick to our strengths. Jax, you and Tessa are on recon. Amir and Cade, you handle security and heavy lifting. I'll be mingling, see who's got a face only a mothership could love. The team nodded, albeit with varying degrees of enthusiasm. They knew the stakes, even if they didn't fully understand the rules of this cosmic game show. Trust was in short supply, and paranoia was their constant companion. Remember, everyone's a suspect, Voss said, his tone sober, and some of them might not even know they are the enemy. Great, Cade murmured. We'll just assume everyone's guilty until proven human. Exactly, Voss declared, as if he'd just solved a great mystery. Now let's go make some new friends. As the team dispersed, Voss couldn't shake the feeling that they were already behind. The infiltration was deeper than they realized, and while they joked and jibed, the clock was ticking. They needed to be faster, smarter, and just a little bit luckier than the opposition. The tournament was about to begin, and whether they liked it or not, humanity's fate was in the hands of this eclectic collection of misfits. As Voss moved through the corridors, he couldn't help but think that if they were going down, they'd do it with style. And maybe, just maybe, they'd take a few of those alien bastards with them. The arena inside the asteroid was a marvel of engineering and human stubbornness. It was as if someone had taken an ancient coliseum and slapped it inside a rock, because clearly, humanity needed more space gladiator-style entertainment in its life. The stands were filled with representatives from across the galaxy, each one looking more suspicious than the last. Voss took in the sights with a raised eyebrow, wondering how many of them were laughing at the humans' folly. Probably most of them. Quite the turnout, Jax commented, sidling up beside Voss. It's like a galactic who's who of people we don't trust. Lovely, Voss replied, scanning the crowd. Remember, eyes peeled for anything out of place, like that guy. Jax pointed towards an unusually tall figure whose limbs bent in ways that suggested a distinct lack of bones. Especially that guy, Voss said, making a mental note. And anyone who talks to him, as the opening ceremony is kicked off with all the pomp and circumstance of a low-budget circus, Voss couldn't help but feel the weight of the universe pressing down on him. This was it, their chance to prove themselves or go down in flames, possibly literally. Commander Voss, a voice called out, and Voss turned to see Admiral Nyla Torres approaching. Her expression was unreadable, but then again, it always was. Admiral, Voss greeted with a nod. Here to see how well we dance under pressure. I'm here to remind you that failure isn't an option, Torres said, her eyes sharp as a knife, and to offer some intel. We've identified some confirmed alien presences. There's a group posing as a delegation from the Andorian Trade Alliance. What's their angle? Voss asked, crossing his arms. Unknown, but they're likely not here to make friends, Torres replied. Keep an eye on them. Voss grunted in acknowledgement. Thanks for the heads up. I'll make sure we roll out the unwelcome mat. Do that. And remember, Commander, this isn't just about survival. It's about showing the galaxy that humanity is more than what they expect. Voss watched as Torres disappeared into the throng, leaving him with more questions than answers. Part of him envied her ability to disappear before things got messy. So, what's the play now? Jax asked, leaning against a railing with the kind of casualness that suggested he might as well have been asking what was for dinner. We find those supposed Andorians and see if they are as suspicious as they sound, Voss replied, already formulating a plan. And if they are, we give them a warm human welcome. Jax smirked. The kind that involves explosions and witty one-liners. Precisely, Voss said with a grin. Let's hope they appreciate our hospitality. As the tournament began in earnest, Voss and his crew slipped into the shadows, their eyes open for any sign of trouble. They didn't have to wait long. The so-called Andorian delegation was hard to miss, standing off to one side like they didn't quite belong, which, if Voss was any judge, they didn't. Looks like they're planning something, Tessa whispered over the comms, her voice barely audible over the crowd. Think they'll appreciate us crashing their party. Only one way to find out, Voss replied, signaling for his team to move in. The Andorians, if that was even their real identity, were engaged in what looked like a hushed argument, their expressions tense and animated. Voss approached with the confidence of someone who knew he was about to ruin someone's day. "Excuse me," Voss said, flashing a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "I couldn't help but notice you seem a bit out of place. Need directions." The tallest of the group turned, its eyes narrowing with suspicion. "We are exactly where we intend to be. Funny, that's what I say when I'm lost," Voss quipped. "So what's your angle, fellas? Here to sell us on some intergalactic timeshares, or is this more of a hostile takeover situation?" "Commander Voss," the alien said, its voice laden with disdain. "You are out of your depth. Wouldn't be the first time," Voss admitted, leaning in closer. "But here's the thing. My team's very good at spotting sharks in the water. And you, my friend, are practically radiating I'm up to no good vibes." The alien sneered, a surprisingly universal expression. "You think you can stop us, stop you?" Voss chuckled darkly. "I'm just here to give you a heads up. We don't take kindly to uninvited guests. So let's keep this civil, yeah? Or my buddy Jax here starts getting twitchy, and trust me, you don't want that." Jax waved cheerfully, his grin feral. "Hi there. Big fan of making things go boom." The delegation exchanged glances, clearly weighing their options. Voss could see the gears turning, the calculations being made. Whatever they decided, he knew one thing. This tournament was about to get a lot messier. "Consider this your first and only warning," Voss said, stepping back to give them space. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we've got a tournament to win, or at least lose spectacularly." As his team regrouped, Voss couldn't help but feel a stirring of something he hadn't felt in a while: hope. It was buried under layers of cynicism and sarcasm, but it was there, flickering weakly like a candle in the wind. "All right, team," he said, his voice low and steady. "Let's go remind them why humanity's not to be underestimated." And with that, they dove back into the fray, ready to face whatever the galaxy threw their way. If they were going down, they'd do it on their terms, with all the humor and defiance they could muster. Because in the end, that's what being human was all about. The first round of the tournament kicked off with all the elegance of a malfunctioning garbage compactor. A voice boomed over the PA system, in a tone that suggested the announcer would rather be doing anything else, including a colonoscopy. "Welcome to the first round of the Interstellar Tournament. May your deaths be entertaining." Commander Rylan Voss rolled his eyes. The whole setup had the charm of a funeral parlor on discount day. "Well, that's uplifting," he muttered, adjusting his gear. "Nothing like a little death threat to start the day." Tessa snorted nearby, busily tinkering with what looked like a toaster with a bad attitude. "If we're going out, at least we'll make it memorable," she said, jamming a plasma grenade into its new home. "Besides, nothing says I love you like a toaster explosion. True love is a pile of ashes," Jax agreed, patting Tessa on the back with the kind of affection usually reserved for stray cats and broken vending machines. The Resolute's crew was hunkered down in a staging area that had clearly seen better days. The floor was a patchwork of hastily welded metal and dubious stains, the kind that screamed health hazard in every conceivable language. But it was home, at least for now. The tournament arena was a sprawling, chaotic mess. The asteroid's interior had been hollowed out and filled with a maze of obstacles and pitfalls, the kind of place that made you wonder if the architect was just one bad day away from a psychotic break. It was all jagged rocks, industrial detritus, and the occasional pool of something that might have been water, but probably wasn't. Voss glanced at his team with a smirk that had all the warmth of a dead fish. "All right, team. Remember the plan: stay alive, spot the aliens, and if possible, don't die screaming." "Solid plan," Cade said dryly, checking the sights on his sniper rifle. "Simple, elegant, impossible." Adrenaline bubbled beneath the surface as the signal to start blared. The team moved out with a determination that belied their flippant attitudes. They slipped into the maze, a tangle of shadows and resolve. The first wave of competitors was a mixed bag of the galaxy's finest opportunists. Some were more human than others, but all were armed to the teeth. Voss had barely rounded a corner when he found himself face-to-face with a particularly enthusiastic contestant wielding a weapon that looked like a cross between a spiked club and a bad joke. "Nice day for it," Voss offered, sidestepping an enthusiastic swing that would have knocked a lesser man into the next star system. "You come here often." The alien, resembling a bipedal porcupine, grunted something that might have been an expletive in its native tongue. Voss countered with a swift jab that sent the creature sprawling into a puddle of questionable liquid. "That's one," Voss said, brushing imaginary dust from his sleeves. Next, Tessa appeared at his side, slightly flushed with the effort of avoiding melee. "You and your charming personality just made a friend," she said, pointing to the porcupine alien who was extracting itself from the puddle with all the grace of a beached whale. "Don't they all?" Voss replied, leading the way deeper into the maze. They moved quickly, trying to cover ground and identify any alien interference. Jax and Cade were holding their own, the former proving adept at turning opponents' aggression against them, the latter picking off threats from a distance with unnerving precision. Anything suspicious? Voss asked over the comms, ducking under a low-hanging beam. Besides this entire setup, Cade's voice crackled back. Yes, spotted a group acting like they're rehearsing for a pantomime. Too coordinated, not enough panic. Definitely not human. Voss frowned, motioning for Tessa to follow. Coordinates? Sending them now, Cade replied. And Voss, they're not playing around. Neither are we, Voss said grimly, adjusting course. They regrouped near the center of the maze, a sprawling area filled with crumbling structures and enough cover to make a sniper weep with joy. Cade's coordinates led them to a vantage point overlooking a cluster of contestants who seemed too organized, their movements precise, their intent focused. Odds they're our alien friends, Jax asked, peering through a pair of battered binoculars. Odds are they're not here to sell cookies, Voss replied, chewing the inside of his cheek. Let's see if we can't make their day a little more interesting. From their vantage point, it was clear these contestants were communicating in a way that suggested more than just camaraderie. Their gestures were precise, like soldiers following orders. Definitely not tourists, Tessa whispered, readying her toaster bomb with a grin that suggested she was envisioning the result with glee. How about we show them how humans throw a party? On my mark, Voss instructed, taking a steadying breath. 3, 2, 1, go. Tessa lobbed her modified toaster with the enthusiasm of a kid throwing a water balloon. It arced through the air, landing amidst the group with a clatter and a flash of light. The explosion was satisfyingly immediate, sending the aliens scattering like startled cats. In the ensuing chaos, Voss and his team descended like a disgruntled storm. Jax was a blur of movement, a whirlwind of fists and feet, while Cade picked off stragglers with a sniper's elegance. Tessa, having exhausted her improvised grenade, joined the fray with a savage efficiency that spoke to years of practice in less-than-legal situations. Well, that's one way to make an entrance, Jax quipped, landing a particularly brutal punch that sent an alien spinning. And here I thought subtlety was overrated, Voss replied, ducking a swing and retaliating with a swift kick to the gut. The fight was over almost as quickly as it had started, leaving the team standing amidst the aftermath, a collection of groaning aliens who very much regretted showing up today. Panting slightly, Voss scanned the area. All right, let's see who our friends really are, he said, gesturing to the nearest conscious alien. Time for a little chat. The alien glared up at him, its expression a mix of anger and something else, something darker. Voss recognized it well, desperation. Who are you working for? Voss asked, crouching down with a smile that held no warmth. And don't bother lying. My buddy Jax here has a special way of knowing when someone's full of crap. The creature hissed something unintelligible but unmistakably defiant. Not feeling chatty, Voss shrugged. That's fine, we can do this the hard way. Tessa, standing nearby, gave a mock sigh of disappointment. You know, I was hoping for a bit more cooperation. Now we'll have to improvise. The alien spat something in its language that even without translation sounded like a curse. Jax knelt beside Voss, flashing his best grin, a terrifying sight on a good day. Look, we know you're not here for the free snacks, so spill. Who sent you? The alien's resolve wavered, its eyes darting nervously to its companions. Voss noted the exchange, the silent communication that suggested there was a hierarchy here, one they hadn't yet uncovered. Enough, Voss said, standing and addressing his team. Let's move. We've flushed them out, but we're not done yet. The tournament continued around them, a cacophony of violence and survival. Voss knew they were just getting started. The aliens were a piece of the puzzle, but the real threat, the infiltration, was bigger, more insidious. **** Later, as they regrouped in a temporary safe zone, Voss couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. The ease with which they'd dismantled the alien group had been unsettling. Something's off, Cade said, echoing Voss's thoughts. The way they moved, the way they reacted. It was like they were testing us, or testing something else, Tessa suggested, her eyes narrowed in thought. Maybe they wanted to see how we'd handle it. Jax let out a low whistle. So what were the entertainment before the main event? Wouldn't be the first time, Voss replied, running a hand through his hair. But we need to stay sharp. If they're probing us, then they're not done. Great, Jax said, cracking his knuckles. I love being part of someone else's science experiment. Voss gave a humorless laugh. Get some rest while you can, folks. The next round is coming, and I doubt it'll be as straightforward. Cade nodded, ever the pragmatist. We'll need to keep our eyes peeled. There's more at play here than we're seeing. As the team settled down, Voss found a moment to collect his thoughts. They were neck-deep in a tournament designed to bring out the worst in everyone, and somewhere in the chaos lurked an enemy they didn't fully understand. Yet, despite the odds, they were still breathing, still fighting. And as much as he hated to admit it, Voss wouldn't have traded this ragtag group of misfits for anything. If they were going down, they'd do it on their terms, with all the snark and defiance they could muster. Because in the grand scheme of things, that's all humanity had ever been good at, surviving when everyone else had written them off. And if there was one thing the galaxy was about to learn, it was this: underestimating humans was a mistake, one that always came with a heavy price. The Resolute's corridors felt even tighter than usual, the kind of claustrophobic that would make a coffin seem cozy. It smelled of unwashed socks, burnt coffee, and the unmistakable tang of stress sweat. Commander Rylan Voss was pacing, his boots tapping out an erratic rhythm on the metal floor that matched the erratic pulse thrumming in his head. He was trying not to think about how much the tournament felt like a particularly brutal game of musical chairs, only with more blood, and the stakes were life or death, not just who got stuck without a seat. "All right, gather up, you misfits," Voss called out, his voice bouncing off the walls with the enthusiasm of a hungover drill sergeant. Cade, leaning back in his chair with the elegance of a tired cat, raised an eyebrow. "So what's the crisis du jour? More aliens with attitude problems. Worse." Voss had spotted what looked like deliberate sabotage among their own ranks. The thought sat in his stomach like a bad breakfast burrito. "I think we've got a mole," Jack snorted. "Great, just when I thought this gig couldn't get any more like a crappy spy novel." Tessa, sitting cross-legged on the floor, fiddling with her latest explosive toy, looked up. "You're serious, right? Like someone from UN Command or one of us?" Her eyes narrowed, suspicion mingling with curiosity. "Not one of us," Voss assured. "But how much do we really know about who's pulling the strings, or about the people who've been tagging along for the ride?" Cade tapped his fingers on his rifle in absent-minded staccato. "So what's the plan, boss? We can't exactly line everyone up for questioning without causing a ruckus." "No, but we can smoke them out," Voss said, a slow grin creeping across his face. "We're due for a little misdirection. We're going to leak some fake intel, see who bites." "Risky," Tessa mused, eyes lighting up at the thought of chaos. "But Risky's our middle name, right? If it's not, it should be," Jax agreed, his grin a flash of white teeth. "Besides," Cade added, leaning forward, "trust is overrated anyway." "I say we see what falls apart when we start shaking the tree." Voss nodded, feeling the familiar rush of adrenaline that always came before things went gloriously sideways. "Let's feed them some info about a supposed weakness in the tournament's security. Something that, if true, would be too good to pass up for anyone looking to sabotage us." "And where exactly do we plan to leak this nugget of disinformation?" Tessa asked, her interest piqued. "The mess hall," Voss said. "Good a place as any. Everyone's gotta eat, even traitors. Or try to," Jax muttered. "If they can stomach the slop they're serving." Voss ignored the quip, focused on the plan. "Tessa, you're the tech whiz. Make sure the comms system picks it up like it's real chatter. Jax, keep your ears open for any whispers. Cade, I want you to keep an eye on anyone acting too interested in private conversations." "You got it, boss," Cade replied, his tone casual but his eyes sharp as a blade. The plan was set, and as they headed to the mess hall, the air crackled with tension. The tournament was back on, each moment a precarious gamble with their lives at stake. The mess hall of the Resolute was a study in utilitarian charm, metal tables bolted to the floor, chairs seemingly designed to cause maximum discomfort, and lighting that flirted with being bearable. Voss sat with his team, their food trays sitting mostly untouched. It wasn't bravery or nerves that kept him from eating, it was the certainty that the mystery meat was planning its own uprising. "So, what do you think the mole eats?" Jax asked, stabbing his fork into a dubious-looking protein patty. "Betrayal with a side of treachery, or maybe they just skip straight to dessert," Tessa replied, her voice low as she adjusted her comms device. Sabotage à la mode. Voss caught sight of the usual suspects: engineers, pilots, soldiers, all gathered in cliques that spoke of alliances and rivalries. But there was something different in the air. A tension, like everyone was waiting for the other shoe to drop. "Keep it cool," Voss murmured, casually glancing around. They needed to act normal, or at least what passed for normal among a group of people who considered normal to be synonymous with survival. The PA system crackled to life, Tessa's handiwork, spreading the false intel through the hall. "Attention all personnel. Due to recent unexpected activity, a vulnerability in the tournament arena has been identified. It's imperative that any unauthorized personnel be reported immediately." The room went silent, the kind of silence that spoke volumes. A few heads turned, glances exchanged, but Voss kept his eyes on his team's reactions and their surroundings. "Now we wait," Voss muttered, leaning back and watching the room like a gambler waiting for the roulette wheel to stop spinning. They didn't have to wait long. A group near the far corner, previously engaged in conversation that involved both hand gestures and loud laughter, had gone unnaturally quiet. One of them, a stocky man with a face like a bulldog's, got up and left, trying too hard to look casual. "Think we've got a nibble," Cade murmured, his gaze tracking the man's retreat. Voss nodded. "Tessa, you're with me." Jax, Cade, keep an eye on the rest. With that, they slipped out, trailing their quarry through the ship's maze-like corridors. It felt like hunting rats in a labyrinth, Only these rats had the potential to blow the whole operation sky high. The man led them to a part of the ship rarely used, the kind of place where you didn't want to be found if the lights went out. He stopped, checking his surroundings, seemingly satisfied he wasn't followed, and entered a small storage room. "Let's see what secrets you're hiding," Voss whispered, gesturing for Tessa to get ready. They approached the door, Voss drawing his sidearm, while Tessa prepared to jam any signals the man might send. Voss kicked the door in with the subtlety of a brick through a window. The man inside jumped, his expression swinging from surprise to fury in seconds. "You really should work on your acting skills," Voss said, leveling the gun at him. "You're about as subtle as a plasma grenade." Tessa quickly scanned the room, finding a comm device. "And what do we have here?" she said, holding it up. "Looks like someone's been making calls without permission." The man scowled, his bravado crumbling. "You don't know what you're getting into," he spat. "Oh, I think we do," Voss countered, keeping his voice steady. "You want to tell me who you're working for, or do we have to do this the hard way?" "I'm not saying anything," the man sneered, though his eyes flickered with doubt. "No," Voss said, stepping closer. "That's fine. You've got all the time in the world, and Tessa here's got a real knack for persuasion." Tessa grinned, her expression promising all sorts of unpleasantness. "Got a few tricks up my sleeve, and trust me, you'll want to talk before we get to the fun part." The man's resolve shattered like cheap glass. All right," he said, hands raised in surrender. "I was just supposed to keep an eye out and report any weaknesses. I don't know who they are, just a voice on the other end." "Why?" Voss pressed. "What's the end game here? All I know is they want the tournament to go south. Cause chaos, maybe more," the man admitted, sweat beading on his forehead. Voss exchanged a look with Tessa. "All right, we'll take this up the chain," he said. "For now, you're coming with us. And if you even think about running, remember, there's no place safe enough to hide." They dragged him back to the main area where Jax and Cade were waiting. Voss explained the situation, a grim satisfaction settling over the group. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a step towards unraveling the mess they'd found themselves in. "So, what now?" Jax asked, looking at their captive with a mix of distaste and pity. "Now," Voss said, "we find out who's pulling the strings and make sure they learn a very important lesson about underestimating humanity." "Sounds like a party," Cade said, his smirk a shadow on his lips. "And the best part is," Tessa added, "it's Biob, bring your own beatdown." With that they moved, the weight of their mission heavy but welcome. It was a fight they hadn't asked for, but they were damn well going to finish it on their terms. The stakes had never been higher, but in the dark corners of space, when the chips were down, humanity had a knack for coming through swinging. And if the galaxy wanted a fight, well, it had found one hell of an opponent. The day of the tournament had arrived, and the mood was about as upbeat as a funeral in a rainstorm. Voss and his team stood in the staging area, which was about as welcoming as a rusted-out junkyard. The air smelled of sweat and desperation, a perfect perfume for impending doom. "Look at this place," Jax muttered, eyeing the surroundings with the enthusiasm of someone forced to inspect a sewer. "I've seen better decor in a prison cell. At least prison cells come with a view," Cade added, adjusting the straps on his gear. "This place has got all the charm of a coffin, minus the luxury." Voss tried to focus, though his mind was a whirlpool of doubt and anxiety. The intel they'd gathered pointed to interference, but they were walking into that arena like lambs to slaughter. Only these lambs packed plasma grenades and bad attitudes. "All right, team," Voss said, attempting to inject some confidence into his voice. "Remember, we're here to survive. Not win, not play hero, survive." Tessa, always the cheerleader of chaos, waved her toaster-like device. "And if any aliens get too close, I've got a little surprise. I call it the breakfast of champions." "Let's hope it's as explosive as your cooking," Jax quipped, earning a glare from Tessa that could melt steel. Voss forced a smile, but it felt like a grimace. "Let's move, people. You've got a date with destiny, or disaster, whichever arrives first." As they marched towards the arena, the walls seemed to close in, the shadows more sinister, as if the asteroid itself was conspiring against them. Or maybe it was just the lighting, damn UN budget cuts. The arena was a chaotic labyrinth of ramps, pits, and obstacles that seemed designed by someone who thought Death Trap was a compliment. Above them, the ceiling was a patchwork of metal and darkness, the perfect setting for a last stand. "Welcome to the Thunderdome," Cade muttered, eyeing the contraptions with a mixture of awe and horror. "Minus the crowd, the cheering, and any hope of coming out alive. Let's just focus on getting through this," Voss said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Keep it tight, keep it clean." "Clean?" Jax snorted. "The only thing clean here is our slate, ready to be wiped." Voss took a deep breath, the chill of the place seeping into his bones. "All right, let's do this." The signal blared, a harsh reminder that the time for jokes was over. Their grim march began, each step echoing with the sound of their own mortality. The first obstacle loomed ahead, a series of shifting platforms over a pit that promised a fall with no bottom. "Just like a board game," Tessa said, eyeing the platforms. "Only the stakes are life and death. No big deal." Cade started across, his movements deliberate, each step a calculated risk. The rest followed, their hearts pounding like war drums. Voss brought up the rear, eyes scanning for threats, both seen and unseen. They were halfway across when the platforms began to shift, sensors detecting their presence. Jack stumbled, a curse slipping from his lips as he barely caught himself. They sure know how to roll out the welcome mat. Keep moving, Voss barked, urgency sharpening his tone. We can't afford to stop. They reached the other side, heart still hammering, but the momentary relief was short-lived. Ahead, the arena twisted into a maze of walls and dead ends, a design crafted by someone who thought confusion was an art form. Great, Cade said, his sarcasm thicker than the walls. A maze, as if things weren't bad enough. At least it's not another pit, Jax offered, though his optimism was as thin as their chances. Let's just focus, Voss said, moving forward, the team following his lead. Each turn felt like a new nightmare, shadows shifting, unseen threats lurking just out of sight. But then it happened, a flash of movement, a blur of violence. An explosion rocked the maze, shrapnel scattering like deadly confetti. Voss ducked, shouting orders, but it was too late. The trap had been sprung. When the dust settled, the team was scattered. Tessa was on the ground, her device shattered, her face set in a grimace of pain. Cade was beside her, cursing his own carelessness, while Jax was nowhere to be seen. Voss's heart sank, the weight of failure crashing down. Jax, sound off, he called, but the silence was like a tomb. His mind raced, the echoes of panic and dread clashing with his instincts. They regrouped, but the loss was palpable, a gaping wound in their ranks. We need to move, Voss said, though the words felt hollow. We can't stay here, but what about Jax? Tessa's voice was a plea, her eyes wide with desperation. We'll find him, Voss promised, though the promise tasted like ashes. But we have to keep moving. The path ahead was a blur of fear and uncertainty. Each step felt heavier, the darkness closing in, their hope dwindling to a flicker. There's got to be an exit, Cade said, his voice edged with frustration. A way out of this hellhole, sure, Tessa replied, her voice tinged with bitterness. If we survive long enough to find it. They pressed on, the maze a relentless adversary, but Voss's mind was elsewhere, haunted by the specter of his decisions, the weight of command a noose tightening around his neck. The arena had claimed its first victim, and the reality of their vulnerability was a cold dagger in Voss's gut. The bravado, the dark humor, it all felt like a cruel joke, a mask slipping away to reveal the grim truth beneath. As they navigated the maze, a sense of isolation settled over them, the walls echoing their every breath, every heartbeat. Voss tried to rally his thoughts, to push aside the doubt gnawing at his resolve. We're not done yet, he said, though the words felt like lies. We keep moving, keep fighting. They rounded a corner, the maze opening into a larger chamber, and for a fleeting moment, hope flickered. But it was short-lived. More adversaries awaited, shadows moving with intent, threats coalescing into a new nightmare. Voss knew they were outmatched, the sense of despair a suffocating presence, but they had no choice. It was fight or die, and as much as his heart ached for Jax, he had to push forward for the team for survival. Stay together, Voss ordered, his voice a razor cutting through the fear. No heroics. We hit hard, we hit fast. They fought with the desperation of the damned, their movements a dance of survival, but the odds were against them, the arena a merciless judge. Voss felt the darkness creeping in, the weight of his decisions a leaden chain. As the fight raged, a bitter realization took hold. This was their darkest hour, and the road to redemption, if it existed, was fraught with peril. But even in the face of defeat, there was a grim determination, a refusal to yield. As they battled side by side, they clung to that one fragile hope, that somewhere in this nightmare there was a way out, a path to victory. The arena might have been a hell of their own making, but as long as they drew breath, there was a chance, however slim. And in the bleak void of space, that chance was a lifeline, a beacon in the dark. As Voss fought, the shadow of doubt lingered, a constant reminder of their precarious fate. But he held onto the hope that they would defy the odds, beat back the darkness, and emerge from the maze not just as survivors but as victors. Because if there was one thing humanity was good at, it was defying the impossible and proving that when the chips were down and all seemed lost, they were at their most dangerous. The arena's air was as thick as a politician's promise, filled with the acrid stench of smoke and charred metal. Voss led his ragtag team through the shadowed corridors like a reluctant shepherd guiding a flock of particularly surly sheep. The loss of Jax gnawed at him like a persistent itch he couldn't scratch, but he shoved it aside. There was no time for sentiment, there was barely time for thinking. So what's the plan, fearless leader? Cade's voice dripped with a sarcasm so thick you could serve it on toast. Or are we just winging it? Voss shot him a look that could curdle fresh milk. The plan is to not die. Any objections? Sounds like a winner to me, Tessa chimed in, fiddling with the remnants of her shattered breakfast of champions. Although I'd prefer having a few more options on the menu than just gruesome demise, they moved cautiously, every clank of their boots against the metal floor echoing like a death knell. As they rounded another corner, Voss began to feel the weight of their predicament. They were out of their depth, and the water was filled with sharks. But if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was pulling a miracle out of their collective asses when the chips were down. You know, Cade mused, peering into the dimly lit abyss ahead. There's something comforting about knowing we're completely screwed. How's that? Tessa asked, her tone light despite their dire circumstances. Expectations are pretty low. At least we won't be disappointed. Voss couldn't help a grim chuckle. And here I thought you were a pessimist, Cade shrugged. Just a realist with a healthy appreciation for irony. They pressed on, their nerves strung tighter than a diplomat's smile, when something shifted in Voss's mind. A plan, or the semblance of one, started to form, a way to use what the aliens had overlooked, human unpredictability. He stopped, causing Tessa to nearly walk into his back. Okay, listen up, Voss said, his voice low and urgent. I've got an idea. It's risky, stupid, and has every chance of getting us all killed, but if there's one thing we know, it's that these alien bastards underestimate us. Great. We're using their ignorance as a weapon, Tessa said, eyeing him like he'd just suggested using a spoon to dig to China. Exactly. We're going to turn our unpredictability into an advantage. Cade raised an eyebrow. And how do you propose we do that? Magic, wishful thinking, improvisation, Voss replied. These alien systems are designed for efficiency and predictability. They won't expect us to go off script, to use this chaos against them. Sounds like a plan so crazy it might just work, Tessa said, a spark of enthusiasm igniting in her eyes. Voss outlined his strategy, a mix of guerrilla tactics and sheer audacity. They'd use the maze layout to their advantage, setting traps and deploying diversions to confuse their enemies. It was desperate, but desperation had a funny way of spurring innovation. As they moved into position, Voss couldn't shake the feeling that this was their last stand, a final gambit in a game they'd never wanted to play. But if they were going to go down, they'd do it on their terms, kicking and screaming all the way. The first phase of their plan kicked off with a bang, literally. Tessa managed to rig her toaster's remains into a makeshift grenade, the explosion reverberating through the corridors like an earthquake. Breakfast of champions indeed, Cade muttered, a wry grin tugging at his lips. The aliens, unnerved by the unexpected blast, scrambled to respond, leaving openings in their defenses. Voss and his team slipped through these gaps like shadows in the night, striking quickly and retreating before their enemies could react. For the first time, they felt the tide turning, however slightly. The aliens' predictable patterns became their undoing, their reliance on order and control a shackle that held them back. The very chaos that had threatened to consume Voss and his team now worked in their favor, a chaotic symphony of destruction that left the aliens reeling. In the midst of the chaos, Voss found himself face to face with one of the alien warriors. Its expression was as unreadable as a tax form, but Voss could sense its hesitation, its confusion at the erratic human behavior. Surprised, Voss taunted, firing his weapon with a confidence he didn't feel. You should have done your homework. The alien fell back, a look of bewilderment etched on its face even as it crumpled to the ground. Voss didn't have time to revel in the small victory. They were still knee-deep in trouble, and the smell of singed metal and ozone filled the air. Keep moving, Voss shouted, urging his team onward, the adrenaline pumping through his veins like a drug. We're not clear yet. They navigated the maze like rats who'd suddenly sprouted wings, darting and weaving, leveraging every twist and turn to outmaneuver their enemies. The alien forces were thrown into disarray, their rigid tactics ill-suited for dealing with the unpredictable chaos that was the hallmark of human ingenuity. Cade, ever the cynic, couldn't resist a parting shot as they bypassed another alien patrol. You know, if we survive this, I might just start believing in miracles. Don't get ahead of yourself, Tessa replied, her voice tinged with humor. We're not out of the woods yet, no, but we've got a map and a compass now, Voss added, feeling a flicker of hope. And that's more than we've had since we got here. The team pressed on, their resolve as unyielding as the steel walls surrounding them. Each victory, no matter how small, bolstered their spirits, and they fought with the desperation of cornered animals. As they moved deeper into the maze, they stumbled upon a room filled with alien technology, consoles glowing with an eerie light. It was here that Voss realized they had the opportunity to turn the tide definitively. If they could disable or redirect the alien systems, they might stand a chance of escaping this death trap alive. Tessa, can you make sense of this? Voss asked, gesturing to the consoles. Tessa approached the alien tech with the same enthusiasm she reserved for puzzles and puzzles alone. Give me a minute. I'll see if I can make it sing and dance. Cade kept watch while Tessa worked her magic, his weapon at the ready. Let's hope we don't get any uninvited guests. Trust me, Cade. No one's coming to this party, Voss replied, his tone a blend of determination and grim humor. After what felt like an eternity, Tessa looked up, a triumphant grin on her face. I think I've got it. We can reroute their systems, give ourselves a fighting chance. Do it, Voss ordered, feeling the weight of their situation lift slightly. And let's hope they don't have a plan B. As Tessa manipulated the alien systems, the team steeled themselves for the next phase of their plan. With any luck, the confusion they'd sown in the alien ranks would buy them the time they needed to make their escape. All right, systems are go, Tessa announced, her fingers dancing across the console. Let's hope they enjoy our little surprise. The alien tech responded to Tessa's handiwork, lights flickering as systems went haywire. Alarms blared, a symphony of chaos that underscored their precarious situation. Time to go, Voss said, urgency lacing his voice. We've outstayed our welcome. They moved with purpose, navigating the chaotic corridors as alarms blared and defenses crumbled around them. The aliens were still reeling from the unexpected disruptions, their responses disjointed and ineffective. As they approached what they hoped was an exit, the thought of Jax lingered like a shadow, a reminder of the cost of their survival. Voss pushed it aside, focusing on the living, on the hope of making it out alive. The final stretch was a gauntlet, a desperate dash through corridors that seemed to stretch on forever. But with each step, the weight of their fear lessened, replaced by a flicker of hope, a spark of defiance that burned brighter with every passing second. In the end, it was their humanity, their chaos, and their unyielding spirit that carried them through. As they emerged into the open, the oppressive walls giving way to the vast expanse of space beyond, Voss felt a surge of triumph tempered with the sobering reality of their situation. They had survived this nightmare, but at what cost? The arena had tested them, pushed them to their limits, and shown them the depths of their resilience. Yet as they stood on the precipice of escape, Voss knew the fight was far from over. Let's get the hell out of here, Cade said, his voice a mix of relief and disbelief. Yes, Voss agreed, his spirit buoyed by their hard-won victory. Let's go home. As they boarded the resolute, battered but unbeaten, Voss allowed himself a moment of reflection. They had defied the odds, proved that even in the darkest of moments, humanity's tenacity could shine through. And as they set a course for the stars, the promise of freedom ahead, Voss knew one thing with certainty. They might be a ragtag bunch of misfits, but they were his misfits, and together they were unstoppable. The Resolute shuddered its way through the asteroid's gauntlet of tunnels like a drunk trying to find his way home after last call. Voss eyed his team, their faces drawn but determined. They'd taken a beating, but the fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. All right, folks, Voss said, his voice echoing slightly in the cramped ship. We've stirred up a hornet's nest, now it's time to squash the damn bugs. Great. I love the smell of cosmic insecticide in the morning, Cade quipped, fiddling with his blaster. Nothing like a pesticide party, Tessa chuckled, finishing up her modifications to another toaster-turned-plasma grenade. Just remember, Cade, if you see any actual hornets, aim for the one with the biggest stinger. Voss rolled his eyes, but a grin tugged at his lips. I'll be sure to include that in the instruction manual. They'd drawn the aliens' attention, but there was something else on the horizon, the sickening suspicion of a mole within the United Nations. A whisper of betrayal lurked in the air, as subtle as a chainsaw. All right, team, it's time to test our little theory. Who's feeling lucky? Voss asked, glancing at his crew. Not sure about luck, Tessa replied, securing the last of her explosive concoctions. But I've got a toaster that's going to make their morning a little brighter, Cade snorted. I suppose we're going to make toast of the bastards. Literally, let's get a move on, Voss ordered, leading them back into the belly of the beast. The corridors of the arena were a familiar nightmare, dark and unwelcoming. Perfect setting for uncovering betrayal and delivering a little payback. As they advanced, Voss's mind drifted to the mole. It gnawed at him, the idea that someone from the inside had sold them out. It was classic human behavior, really, ruin a party by inviting the wrong guests. Keep your eyes peeled, Voss warned. We've got to find the marionette master pulling the strings. And then we'll cut them, Roger that, Tessa said, her gaze scanning the shadows. If I see anyone looking suspicious, I'll just assume they're guilty. Hell, let's just assume everyone's guilty, Cade interjected. It'll save time. Despite the humor, tension coiled around them, a viper ready to strike. The enemy was close, and the only thing they had going for them was the element of surprise, that, and a deep-seated hatred for losing. As they moved deeper into the arena, they encountered another patrol of aliens. These guys looked as lost as a penguin at a beach party. Voss signaled to his team, and they took up positions, blending into the shadows. Hey, Voss, Cade whispered, lining up his shot. Ever notice how aliens scream in every language? Yeah, well, music is universal, Voss replied dryly. Too bad their taste is crap. With the first shot, chaos erupted. Plasma bolts lit the corridor, painting the walls with the kind of abstract art that would make a museum curator weep. The aliens' rigid responses crumbled as quickly as a house of cards in a gust of wind. When the dust settled, Voss surveyed the scene with grim satisfaction. Another fine mess we've made, just like Mom used to make, Tessa added, pocketing another plasma grenade. The victory was short-lived, though. A voice crackled over the comms, harsh and all too familiar. Admiral Nyla Torres. Voss, we've got a situation. It's bad, define bad, Admiral, Voss replied, his tone flat as ever. Turns out the mole wasn't just whispering secrets. They've got a whole damn orchestra down here, playing for the aliens, perfect. Just when I thought we couldn't get more outnumbered, Voss muttered, his eyes darkening. We're moving in, copy that. Keep me posted, Torres said, her voice steady despite the chaos. Admiral, was that concern I heard? Cade interjected. Don't get used to it, Torres replied before the line went dead. All right, people, Voss said, rallying his team. Let's go find the conductor of this little alien symphony. They moved swiftly, the corridors shifting around them like a bad dream. The maze seemed endless, but they pressed on, driven by necessity and a healthy dose of spite. As they neared what looked like a control center, Voss held up a hand, signaling a halt. This is it. If the moles got friends, they'll be in there. Best not to keep them waiting then, Tessa said, her voice tinged with grim amusement. The door slid open, revealing a room filled with alien tech and a handful of humans. A chill ran down Voss's spine. It wasn't often he got the chance to meet the people who wanted him dead face to face. Look what the cat dragged in, Cade said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. One of the humans turned, a smirk playing on their lips. Ah, Commander Voss, so nice of you to join us, got an invite. Would have RSVP'd but didn't want to ruin the surprise, Voss shot back, his weapon never wavering. The traitor laughed, a sound as pleasant as nails on a chalkboard. All this time and you still haven't figured it out. Figured what out? Voss asked, playing for time. That you're an asshole. Surprised it took you this long. Humans always think they're the center of the universe. Newsflash, Rylan, you're not even the center of this room. Voss's eyes narrowed. You're working with them. Why? The traitor smirked again, a slimy expression that made Voss want to introduce their face to his fist. Why not? You think the UN got your back? They're just as much in the dark as you are. Then enlighten us, Tessa said, her grip tightening on her weapon. Let's just say the universe is a lot bigger than you think. The aliens aren't the enemy, they're just the first wave, Cade snorted. And you're what? Leading the parade, something like that, the traitor replied, their confidence unshakable. Voss's patience was wearing thinner than a cheap suit. Guess it's time to cut the music, he said, nodding to his team. Tessa and Cade opened fire, and the room erupted into chaos once more. The aliens and their human allies didn't stand a chance. Voss and his team moved with precision, their training and desperation a potent mix. When the dust settled, only Voss's team remained standing. The traitor lay among the fallen, their eyes wide with disbelief, as if they'd never considered this outcome. Guess they didn't think this through, Tessa said, her voice light despite the carnage. They never do, Cade replied, holstering his weapon. Easier to just assume they're the smartest in the room. Returning to the Resolute, Voss felt a strange mix of relief and lingering dread. The mole was dealt with, but the revelation of a larger threat hung over them like a storm cloud. Admiral, the mole's been dealt with, Voss reported, his voice steady. Torres's voice cracked over the comms, a hint of relief evident. Good work, Voss, we're pulling you out. This is going to get a lot worse before it gets better. Isn't it always? Voss replied, a wry smile touching his lips. Get your team home, Torres ordered. We'll debrief once you're clear. Copy that, Voss said, signing off. He turned to his team, a glint of determination in his eyes. Let's wrap this up and get the hell out of here. As they boarded the ship, Voss couldn't help but reflect on their journey. They'd been pushed to their limits, faced with betrayal and enemies from within and without. But through it all they'd survived, not because of luck, but because of their unique brand of chaos. All right, everyone, Voss said, settling into his seat. Let's go home. Drinks are on me when we get back, Cade chuckled. That's the best news I've heard all day. Just don't expect any fancy cocktails, Tessa added, grinning. I'm thinking more along the lines of whatever's cheapest. Voss laughed, a genuine sound that felt good after everything they'd been through. Sounds perfect. As the Resolute broke free from the asteroid's grip, the stars stretched out before them, a reminder of the vast unknown that awaited. But for now, they had each other, their ship, and a future that was theirs to shape. And as Voss looked at his team, he knew one thing with certainty. Whatever came next, they'd face it together, with humor, grit, and the kind of irreverence that made them a force to be reckoned with. The universe might be a dangerous place, but with friends like these, it also promised an adventure like no other. The remnants of the battle were still drifting in the void when Earth began its celebrations. News of the team's unexpected triumph had spread faster than a bad rumor, and humanity, ever the sucker for drama, was basking in the afterglow of survival. Commander Rylan Voss and his ragtag crew might not have saved the universe, but they'd certainly kept their corner of it from going up in smoke, and that was more than enough to put a spring in their step, or a stumble, as the case may be. Back on board the Resolute, Voss stood on the bridge, staring out at the stars. It was a sight that never got old, despite everything he'd seen. The universe was vast, cold, and largely indifferent, but today it felt like a friendly smirk from an old rival. Thinking deep thoughts again, boss, came Cade's voice from behind him, as casual as a cat in a sunbeam. The man had a knack for sneaking up on people, which was both impressive and a tad disturbing. Voss turned, finding Cade leaning against the bulkhead, arms crossed, a smirk on his face that could rival the galaxies. Nah, Voss replied with a shrug. Just wondering how many people out there are pissed they didn't bet on us. Cade chuckled, a sound halfway between a cough and a laugh. Probably enough to fill a stadium or two, but hey, drinks are on you, remember. Voss rolled his eyes, but he couldn't help the grin. Yeah, just make sure Tessa doesn't blow up the bar trying to make a toast. As if summoned by her own reputation, Tessa entered the bridge, pockets rattling with the familiar clink of metallic contraptions. Who said anything about blowing up bars? I'm insulted you'd think that low of me, Commander. You're right, Tessa, Voss said, feigning remorse. How could I forget you'd do it with style? Damn straight, she replied with a wink, settling into a chair with the air of someone who's earned it. Jax, ever the quiet one when there was nothing to shoot, entered last, his gaze scanning the room like it was an alien language. So, what's the plan? We get medals or we just get forgotten again. Why not both? Voss suggested, shrugging. We saved the day. The least they can do is pretend to honor us before shoving us back into the shadows. Sounds about right, Jax agreed, mouth curving into a rare smile. Guess we're not doing this for the glory, then. Only glory you'll find in this line of work is in Cade's cooking, Tessa quipped, earning a snort from Cade. Hey, I don't see any complaints when you're asking for seconds, Cade shot back, holding up his hands in mock surrender. Maybe next time we can save the universe over a nice lasagna, Voss offered, his mood lighter than it had been in months. But for now, let's get back to Earth. I'm sure the bureaucrats have a medal with our name on it, or at least a strongly worded letter. You think they'll actually do something for us? Jax asked, skepticism lacing his tone. Voss chuckled, a dark edge to the sound. The UN, they'd give us a parade if they thought it'd score them points. But let's not hold our breath for anything more than a pat on the back. The team settled into a comfortable silence, the hum of the ship's systems a soothing presence. They might have been through hell, fought against impossible odds, and faced betrayal from within, but they'd come out the other side together. And that, in Voss's book, was worth more than any medal. As the Resolute approached Earth, the sight of the planet, a swirling blue and green marble, was enough to make even the most cynical of them pause. Home might be a mess, but it was their mess, and they'd fight to keep it that way. The landing was surprisingly smooth, considering the ship had seen better days. UN Command had rolled out the welcome mat, complete with camera crews and a few officials eager to bask in the reflected glory of the team's success. Admiral Nyla Torres was waiting for them as they disembarked, her expression as unreadable as ever. Voss couldn't quite tell if she was genuinely pleased to see them or just relieved she wouldn't have to lie to the press about their deaths. Commander Voss, Torres greeted, nodding curtly. Congratulations on your victory. Funny, I don't remember it feeling like one, Voss replied, his tone respectful but edged with his usual sarcasm. Torres's lips twitched, the closest she ever came to a smile. The best victories rarely do, but you and your team have done well. The information you gathered will be invaluable. Glad to hear it, Voss said, glancing back at his crew. Although I'm guessing the real fun starts now. Always, Torres replied, her gaze flicking to the gathered media. We've prepared statements for you. Nothing too incriminating, I promise, Cade snorted. And here I was hoping for a little scandal. Save it for your memoirs, Torres advised dryly. Now, please try not to say anything that will get us all court-martialed. No promises, Tessa muttered under her breath, drawing a chuckle from Jax. The team navigated the press conference with the grace of a herd of cats, dodging questions with practiced ease and offering just enough platitudes to keep the higher-ups happy. By the time it was over, Voss felt like he'd run a marathon, emotionally if not physically. As they regrouped in a quiet corner of the base, Voss looked at his team, the people he'd come to rely on more than anyone else in the universe. So, what now? He asked, the question open-ended. Catch up on sleep, Cade said immediately. And maybe a few drinks, Tessa shrugged, a mischievous glint in her eye. I've got a few ideas for some new gadgets. You never know when you'll need a toaster that doubles as a grenade, or a grenade that makes toast, Jax added deadpan. Voss nodded, his heart lighter for their banter. Sounds like a plan. But whatever you do, don't forget, we're not done. Not by a long shot. The others nodded, understanding the unspoken truth. The universe was still out there, full of threats and challenges they couldn't even begin to imagine. But they'd face it with the same mix of defiance, humor, and sheer stubbornness that had seen them through so far. It wasn't long before the team began to drift apart, each member answering the call of their own personal quests. Cade found himself drawn to a quiet corner of the world, opening a small bar where the drinks were strong and the stories even stronger. His nights were filled with laughter and the clink of glasses, a far cry from the battlefield but a war zone in its own right. Tessa, never one to sit still for long, dove into her inventions with renewed vigor. Her workshop became a haven of creativity and chaos, where plasma grenades shared space with the occasional coffee maker. Rumor had it she was working on a device that could make breakfast and blow up a small moon. She insisted it was purely theoretical. Jax, ever the cynic with a heart of gold, found a place in the burgeoning field of alien diplomacy. His knack for reading people and aliens proved invaluable in smoothing over the inevitable misunderstandings that came with first contact situations. It turned out, not everyone appreciated human sarcasm. As for Voss, he returned to the stars, unable to resist the call of the unknown. He took command of a new ship, a sleek model with more firepower than a small army. But more importantly, it had enough room for crew that someday might feel like family again. In the end, the legacy of their journey wasn't in medals or accolades. It was in the bonds they'd forged, the laughs they'd shared, and the knowledge that, when the chips were down, humanity had a fighting chance. The universe was still a dangerous place, full of shadows and secrets, but with people like the Resolute's crew out there, it was also a place of endless possibilities. And that, Voss mused as he gazed out at the stars from his new command, was a future worth fighting for. So they went their separate ways, carrying with them the grit, the humor, and the irreverence that had kept them alive. They might not have been heroes, but in a universe that seemed determined to end them, they'd managed to write their own story, and in the end, that was the greatest victory of all. As the Resolute's crew faded into legend, Earth continued its celebrations, a brief respite in a galaxy that rarely offered such luxuries. But even as the cheers faded and the spotlight moved on, the spirit of humanity endured, stubborn as ever and ready for whatever came next. Because if there was one thing the universe could count on, it was that humans were nothing if not resilient. And that, for better or worse, was a fact as certain as the stars themselves.